About 10 months ago, I was hanging out with my college buddy Chris in his small hometown. We were having a blast, hitting up the local bars, and just enjoying ourselves. On my last night there, Chris mentioned this place he wanted to check out, a run-down spot in the woods, some abandoned houses or something. Now, Chris and I used to be big into exploring back in college, so it sounded cool to me. Within 30 minutes, we were trekking through this path in the woods just before sundown. We had our headlamps handy, just in case. After about 20 minutes, the trail ended, and we had to follow this faint footpath through the trees for another hour. Finally, we saw it, a cluster of houses in the distance. They weren't as decrepit as we expected, though. They looked weathered, but had modern siding and stuff. There was even a gravel road leading to each house. It seemed like they were meant to be a community, but something went south. Graffiti covered the sides of the houses, showing others had been here before us. Chris and I approached the nearest house, peering through the open doorway. Weeds were sprouting through the floorboards, but otherwise, it was empty. Then, out of nowhere, there was this loud slam that echoed through the woods. We both jumped, scanning the gravel road where we thought it came from. After that, dead silence. We were spooked but shrugged it off and stepped inside. There wasn't much to see downstairs, just the remnants of what might have been a nice home. Upstairs, though, it got weird. It was darker than it should have been, like the windows weren't letting in any light. The hallway was short with only 2 doors and what looked like an attic. We went to the first door, opened it, and found another empty room. But then we heard footsteps outside, shuffling through the grass, getting closer to the house. We froze, listening as whoever was approached. They came right up to the front door and stopped. "Hello," a shaky voice called out. "I just want to talk. No harm at all." The voice was raspy, like the guy was missing teeth or something. We stayed quiet, wondering why he was approaching us out here. After what felt like forever, the silence was eerie. Chris cautiously went downstairs, peeking out the front door. His face went pale. "There's nobody there," he whispered urgently. I hurried down to see for myself, and he was right. No one in sight. We exchanged a look, both realizing the guy must have been hiding inside the house. Without a word, we bolted for the trees, racing back to Chris's place as fast as we could. Who that guy was and what he wanted, we had no clue. But one thing was certain: if he'd found us, we might not be here to tell the tale. In the Midwest, near where I live, there are many abandoned places. During my senior year of high school, my friends and I often explored these eerie spots for fun. One Memorial Day weekend, with school almost over, we decided to visit a place we'd heard a lot about, a semi-ghost town called Cairo. Cairo, built in the late 1800s, declined due to flooding and racial tensions, leaving most of it deserted for decades. Intrigued by stories from others, we set out on a Sunday evening. Tristan picked me and Ryan up, and we drove 2 hours south to Cairo, passing through vast farmlands with few towns around. Entering Cairo's road felt unsettling. It was pitch black and abandoned, except for distant lights from a few occupied houses. We parked next to an old brick building labeled Liquor and stepped out, feeling the wind rustling through the deserted streets. Ryan led the way down the road. On one side, wooden homes reclaimed by nature stood among vines, while on the other, old shops lined up. One particular building caught our attention, a weathered theater with a sign that said, "Gym," complete with a ticket booth beside it. Curious, we used our flashlights to enter through a window. Inside, it was dark and musty, with our feeble flashlights barely illuminating the debris-covered floor. As we explored, Ryan suddenly froze, claiming he heard a footstep from above. Tristan and I listened, but heard nothing, attributing it to the building's creaks. We continued upstairs to the balcony, where rows of seats faced a stage below. Midway through the chairs, a creak behind us made us whirl around. In the shadows, a disheveled man emerged, holding a small revolver and staring directly at us. The silence amplified our fear. Tristan bolted downstairs, leaving me and Ryan to calmly inform the man we were leaving. He remained silent and motionless as we retreated, then sprinted back to the car. The drive back was tense, none of us speaking until we reached safety. Reflecting on the encounter, I speculated the man once lived in Cairo and, as it declined, ended up hiding in its abandoned buildings. That night could have ended much worse, but we were fortunate to escape unharmed. Since then, we've avoided exploring such places, mindful of the dangers hidden within abandoned memories of Cairo. I've done a lot of solo exploring over the years, mills, schools, old houses, but the abandoned psychiatric hospital was the first place that made me stop at the door and ask myself if I really wanted to be there. It wasn't the building's size that got to me, though it sprawled across a hilltop like it owned the land. It was the silence. Most big, empty places have some kind of background noise. Wind through broken windows, birds in the rafters, a distant hum from the street. This place had nothing, just the stillness of a photograph. The hospital had been empty for over 20 years. The locals told me about it at the diner when I asked for any old buildings worth photographing. They said it was sealed up for good after a fire in one wing, but I'd seen recent posts on an Urbex forum showing people inside. It was all peeling paint, rusted bed frames, and long, echoing hallways. Exactly the kind of shots I wanted for my portfolio. I parked a quarter-mile away, where the access road was blocked by concrete barriers, and walked up through waist-high weeds. The main entrance was chained, so I found an open basement window at the back. The frame was warped enough for me to slide through, landing on damp tile in what looked like a laundry room. My flashlight beam picked out baskets, their wire frames orange with rust and lint still clinging to the grates. Upstairs, the hospital felt bigger than it looked from outside. The corridors seemed to stretch further than they should, their ends fading into shadow even in daylight. My boots crunched glass and plaster dust. I could smell burned wood from the old fire. The first hour was uneventful. I shot rooms with stripped mattresses, desks tipped on their sides. Ancient graffiti scratched into the paint instead of sprayed. In the day ward, sunlight fell in clean squares through tall, broken windows, catching the dust in lazy spirals. I started to relax until I heard the footsteps. They came from the floor above me. Light, deliberate. Not the fast scamper of an animal, but a steady human rhythm. Step, pause, step. I froze, listening. The sound matched my position almost exactly, as if whoever it was pacing directly above me. I told myself it could be another explorer. I even considered calling out, but something in the way the steps paused made me keep quiet. They weren't random. They were following. I decided to check. The main staircase was half collapsed, so I used the fire stairs at the end of the hall. My flashlight beam jittered over walls painted a sickly green, flaking in curls. The air grew colder as I climbed, though the windows up here were more intact. On the second floor, I walked toward where I thought the footsteps had been. The corridor was lined with patient rooms, each with its own small window in the door. My light passed over beds with their springs exposed, over piles of yellowed medical charts scattered on the floor. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something sharper, antiseptic maybe, that had never quite faded. That's when I saw the shoe prints. In the dust coating the linoleum, a trail of prints, size maybe 10 or 11, led away from me, deeper into the hall. They were crisp, fresh, no other disturbance around them, no older, smudged marks like you'd expect from years of visitors. Just this single path. I followed, The prints stopped outside a room with its door open just enough for me to see inside. The window in the door was intact, but clouded from decades of grime. I leaned in and flicked my light through the gap. The room was empty, or at least it should have been. In the dust on the floor, the prints went in but didn't come back out. I stepped inside, scanning the corners. Just bare walls and a radiator beneath the window. The ceiling tiles sagged. I crossed to the far wall, my flashlight catching the faint marks of something dragged along the paint. My pulse was loud in my ears. I was halfway through deciding that maybe I'd imagined it when I heard them again, footsteps, this time in the corridor behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The sound kept going, though soft but clear, moving past the doorway toward the fire stairs. I stepped out quickly, my beam chasing the noise. No one, just a long stretch of green-painted walls, the peeling numbers above the doors. The footsteps faded down toward the far end, where the hall turned toward the burned-out wing. I followed again, moving faster now, but when I rounded the corner, the air changed, warmer, heavier, full of the smell of char. The floor here was warped and brittle, and I knew better than to walk too far. That's when I realized something was wrong. The prints in the dust were there again, but now they weren't ahead of me. They were behind me, leading back the way I'd come. I turned slowly, scanning with my light. The hallway was still empty, but the prints went all the way back to the room I'd just left, as if someone had been walking right behind me. That was enough. I walked, didn't run, back to the fire stairs. My boots rang on the metal treads, too loud. At the bottom, I crossed the day ward without looking back, my only thought to get out the way I came in. In the basement laundry room, I paused. The window I'd entered through was just ahead, pale daylight spilling through it. And across the dusty tile floor between me and the window, more prints. Fresh, coming from the far end of the room where the shadows pooled thickest. They stopped halfway to the window. No turn, no return path, just ended, as if whoever made them had been lifted straight up into the air. I didn't wait to puzzle it out. I crawled through the window, dropped into the weeds outside, and didn't stop walking until I reached my car. I sat there with the engine running, breathing hard, telling myself 100 explanations. Someone else had been in there. I just missed them. The prints were older than I thought. The sound was water in the pipes. But the hospital had no running water, no heat, no visitors besides me. And prints don't just stop without a turn or an exit. I haven't been back. I still check the Urbex forums sometimes, but no new photos of the place have been posted in months. The last one was taken from the second floor, looking down a corridor with green walls and numbers over the doors. In the center of the frame is a set of shoe prints in the dust, heading toward the camera. The poster captioned it, "Didn't see anyone else here, but it felt like I wasn't alone." The first time I smelled the mill, I understood why the town never rebuilt around it. Even years after the shutdown, the air had a sour, pulpy bite that sat in the back of the throat like old pennies. I'd come to see my cousin for a long weekend. Quiet place, cheap beer, bad cell signal. And by the second night, we'd run out of things to do that didn't involve sitting on his porch and counting mosquitoes. That's when he said, "We could go look at the paper mill. They're finally tearing it down next month." Exploring abandoned places wasn't new to us. In high school, we'd broken into the old bus depot once and found nothing but a family of raccoons and a calendar for 1998. But the mill had always been off limits. Workers died there, my aunt told me. She didn't say how many or how, only that the mill fed the whole valley and then swallowed part of it. People here believed in leaving heavy places alone. We went anyway. We parked at the end of a gravel lane that used to be the employee lot. Weeds grew in thick ropes between broken concrete slabs. The building itself crouched by the river, an L-shaped hulk of brick and corrugated tin, dotted with busted-out windows. As the sun slid behind the hills, the mill seemed to pull light into itself. My cousin handed me a headlamp. "Quick loop," he said. "In and out." "Uh-huh," I said, and made sure my phone was on airplane mode to save battery. No signal out there, just the river talking to itself. Inside the front loading bay, we stepped over rotted pallets and fragments of blue plastic strap that once held shipments together. It smelled like wet cardboard and rust. Our beams swept over conveyors, rollers, a forklift bricked in by its own flat tires. Pipes ran along the ceiling like veins. Somewhere water was dripping in a steady, hollow ping. We moved slow, careful with our footing. Graffiti layered every smooth surface. At one point, I spotted a fresh tag, bright paint, not yet chalked by dust, that made me hesitate. Someone else had been here recently. Maybe still was. "Don't sweat it," my cousin said. "Kids come and go." We passed the vats. Huge round mouths sunk into the floor where pulp once churned. Past those lay a hallway to the offices. Most doors hung open. The glass window of the supervisor's office was punched out. A carpet of safety glass always looks like sugar until you step on it. I kept my hands in my hoodie pocket, resisting the urge to touch anything. We wandered deeper than I planned, the kind of aimless drifting that abandoned buildings encourage. Every room promised an answer to a question you hadn't thought to ask. Who kept this ledger? Who smoked these cigarettes? Who wheeled this chair to this exact spot and then never returned? It's a museum of interrupted lives. It happened in the southern wing. The air turned colder, and our lights found a corridor lined with heavy steel doors, each with a small square of black glass at eye level. The doors were bolted from the outside, thick sliding latches like something you'd see on a walk-in freezer. Storage? My cousin guessed. I stepped closer. Rust ran from the bolts like dry blood. Most doors stood ajar, revealing empty concrete rooms, 10 feet by 10, stained in a way that didn't care to explain itself. But the second to last door was shut. Its latch was slid into place and padlocked. Though the lock had been cut, jagged gap through the shackle like a mouth missing a tooth. The door itself was off plumb, tugged slightly inward, as if the room had swallowed it. "Probably nothing," my cousin said. "Then why's it bolted?" I asked. He shrugged, and that shrug was both invitation and dare. We argued without saying much. He flicked his light toward an open door across the hall like, "We can look at that instead." I kept my beam on the locked one. The river murmured through broken panes somewhere above us. That steady drip continued. When he finally set his shoulder against the steel, I helped. The door did not want to open. It was lighter than it looked, but the frame had warped and the bolt plate caught on its own rust. We had to lift and yank at the same time. On the third, try gave an inch, then two, then swung open with a moan that harmonized with the river. The smell rolled out first. Not rot, not exactly, stale human. Sweat ground into fabric, damp shoes, breath trapped and rebreathed. Our lights cut the dark. The room held a filthy sleeping bag, a heap of flattened cardboard, and a plastic grocery bag half full of something. The walls were scratched, tiny lines that didn't form words so much as attempts. Near the floor, someone had drawn a calendar of excess with a nail. "Looks recent," my cousin whispered. "Yeah." We didn't step in. The room felt small in a way that pressed the ribs. My light caught a stack of instant ramen packets, all opened along the side with a knife. The plastic bag held the empties. Next to it lay a metal spoon, bent at the neck, and a disposable lighter. The sleeping bag zipper was broken, teeth splayed like fish bones. A water bottle with a chewed cap sat beside it, half full of something gray-brown. I didn't try to decide what. My cousin tapped my arm and pointed to the door. There, scratched into the paint at shoulder height, was a word, "Stay." "Stay out," I said. "Or stay in," he said. We were still looking at the word when the outer latch slid. It was a soft sound, casual, like someone shifting their weight against the door. Then one clean metallic clack. The door swung past my cousin's shoulder, pushed from the corridor, and the bolt dropped into place with a weight I fell to my knees. Someone had closed us in and sealed it. We didn't move for a second. I think both of us believed we were wrong, that we'd imagined it. Then my cousin went for the door, fingers fumbling blind for the latch, and I lunged after him. From the hall came footsteps, 2 sets, no, a single set, retreating steadily. Calm, unhurried. "Hey," my cousin shouted. "Hey, we're in here." The footsteps never paused. They turned the corner and were gone. We pushed the door. It didn't budge. The latch must have fallen into the steel plate cleanly, and without the exterior handle we couldn't lift it. My cousin yanked at the seam, feet sliding on concrete. I took a breath, pulled in the stink of the room, and put my shoulder against it with him. The door gave nothing back. "Phone," I said. "You pulled his." No bars. I checked mine. Same. The mill's belly swallowed signal. "Okay," I said, pretending my voice was steady. "It's fine. They'll realize someone's here. We can shout." We shouted. The room absorbed it. I heard the river again, and the drip, and then something else, a faint, irregular scrape from the far wall, down near the sleeping bag. I turned my headlamp. The scratch marks on the paint were newer there. Some had torn through to bare metal. The calendar of excess covered only 2 weeks. And below it, near the floor, was a line that wasn't a scratch. It had a curve and a bite to it. A letter, then another. They were all faint, as if made with a dull nail or a key. But the message was clear once my brain found it. "Don't talk." I swallowed. My cousin had already seen it. He stared at the words a long time, then crouched by the pile of cardboard and lifted the top piece. Underneath lay a folded denim jacket and a pair of boots with cracked soles. The jacket had something heavy in the pocket. He pulled it out, a short pry bar, the kind you might call a Wonder Bar. Fresh were on the edges. "Someone lives here," he said, "or did. If they're coming back," I said, "I'd rather meet them in the hallway." We attacked the door with the bar. The angle was terrible. There was no good purchase. We worked at the seam, trying to lift the latch with leverage we didn't have. The steel screamed and sang. My heart beat in my teeth. Sweat made my hands slippery. After a minute, the bar slipped and clanged off the floor, loud enough to wake whatever slept under the building. We froze, listening. Footsteps again. The same calm pace. Coming this time. My cousin lifted the bar. I reached for the sleeping bag, not sure why. It was a stupid gesture, tidying a room we might never leave. The steps approached until they were just beyond the door. They stopped. We held our breath. The person outside leaned close. I knew it not because of any sound, but because the smell through the seam changed, the faint edge of tobacco and something sweet like cough syrup. Their voice was a whisper meant for the gap, placed in our mouths. "Quiet now," it said. Quiet. I looked at my cousin. He held the bar ready, eyes big. "He mouthed, who?" I shook my head. The voice wasn't old or young. It could have been anyone. It reminded me of long nights on buses, how strangers take on a shape only when they stand. "Look," my cousin said too loud. "We're just leaving." The voice didn't answer for a long time. Then it said, "That's right," like you'd talk to a child. The shadow outside shifted. A knock, gentle on the steel. "You'll leave when it's time." I felt something cold wash down my back. "Please," I said. "We're not here to—" The footsteps retreated. We listened until they were gone. We waited another minute, then 5. The drip counted for us. My headlamp hummed faintly, the way LEDs do when you listen too hard. "Keep trying," my cousin said at last, and we went back to the latch. He worked the bar while I wedged my fingertips into the seam to lift. The door warmed under my hands. My arm shook. Nothing moved. We switched. I jammed the bar in where the bolt met the frame and pried, feeling for any give. There was a tiny click, and for a second the bar lifted the bolt a hair. My cousin put his weight into the door. It shifted enough to make a hopeful, awful sound. And then whatever tiny freedom we'd carved slipped away, and the bolt slammed back down with a finality that made my stomach turn. He stepped back and swore, rubbing his hands on his jeans. I sank onto the cardboard. Dust plumed. The jacket of my feet smelled like old rain. "Let's think," I said. "About what?" "About why." He stared at me like I'd lost it. But that's where my mind went. Not to how we'd get out, but to why the room existed, why someone used it, why the door's scratches formed letters that weren't please, but rules. Why the calendar had only 14 excess. I mean, I tried again. Why locked from the outside? What's that for? He looked at the spoon, the lighter, the ramen, the water bottle with its gray-brown contents. He looked at the word stay. He didn't have to answer. The answer sat with us. My cousin is braver than me. When the fear in the room became a second atmosphere, he stood and put his ear to the seam. After a while he nodded. "He's not there." "He," I repeated, like the word could shrink the unknown to a single body. Or she. I don't know. He set his shoulder to the steel. On 3. We didn't count. We just pushed until pain turned to noise. Something in my chest went tight. The door shouted in a voice that didn't belong to metal or mill or river. I heard the bolt scrape up a fraction, just enough for its edge to touch daylight. I couldn't see. My cousin drove the pry bar under it, arms shaking like a stalled engine. The bar bit. The bolt lifted another fraction. We were going to do it, and then the footsteps came back at a run. The bar slipped. The bolt slammed. The footsteps didn't stop. They came straight to the door, and the person outside threw their weight against it from the other side. It was like being tackled by a wall. The bar skittered across the floor. My cousin went down, palms skinned. I staggered backward into the sleeping bag and nearly fell. On the other side, the breathing was steady. Not winded. Not angry. Just present. "You don't listen well," the whisper said. I don't remember deciding to speak. The words found their own path. "We'll leave," I said. "You saw our faces. We'll tell nobody. You'll never see us again." Another long silence. Then, quietly, "You're not the ones I worry about." The hallway noises shifted. A shuffle. Something like a bag being adjusted on a shoulder. A soft clink of metal. The voice leaned close again. "You hear about a place, and you come see it. You take pictures. You call it spooky. Then you go home. I don't mind that. You don't stay. The ones who stay are the problem." The calendar of excess swam in my vision. 2 weeks. Stay. Who stayed? I asked. Where are they? The person outside let out a slow exhale that could have been a laugh or a regret. "Gone," they said. "Some leave. Some don't." My cousin stood, blood on his palms, face set. He picked up the bar again, but the resolve in him had shifted. Not more fear. Not less. Different. "Please," I said to the seam. "It's a mistake. We'll walk out and never come back. You have my word." "You already gave your word," the voice said softly. "The moment you opened the door." Steps receded again. We stood listening, waiting for the trick return, the test. It didn't come. Eventually, I heard a door open somewhere far off and then shut. Then nothing but drip and river and our breathing. The second hour was worse than the first. Panic got smaller and sharper. The room's corners crept inward. The headlamps do not feel like light after a while. They feel like effort. We sat on opposite sides of the room and talked about anything that wasn't real, because the real thing, how we might spend the night in a locked steel box while someone moved through the building around us, made my mouth go dry. At some point, my cousin stood and went to the scratches. He ran a finger over "don't talk," following the letters like a map. He nodded once, sharply, as if agreeing with whoever wrote it. Then he said, "Let's make noise." Didn't he just? Not talking to him. He dug in his pocket for his car keys. The ring had a small flathead screwdriver on it, a cheap multi-tool gift from a bank. He jammed it between metal and frame, found the bolt again, and put his whole body into levering it up. I put the pry bar beneath to hold any progress. The tool groaned. The screw head bent. The bolt lifted a hair, then another. My arm shook so hard the light on my forehead jittered like a heartbeat. Now, he said, we both shoved the door at once. It moved. The bolt scraped along the edge of the plate, metal chewing metal. The bar slipped, caught. The door gave an inch. 2. The bolt popped above the plate and hung there like a stubborn tooth. My cousin threw himself at the seam. The door swung. We stumbled out into the corridor, both of us expecting a shadow to be standing there with a calm smile and a finger to the lips. The hall was empty. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We ran. The mill became a blur of runes and conveyors and numbers on walls. We hit daylight like surfacing at the loading bay. The sky had turned the thin blue of almost night. I remember the smell of outside air. I remember the small white flowers growing in the cracks by the door. I remember my cousin stopping just for a second to slide the steel door to that room shut again, not latching it, just closing it softly, as if the quiet would make amends. We didn't go to the car right away. We walked down to the river and stood with our hands on our knees and breathed. Neither of us asked the other what we'd heard, or who he thought he was, or she was, or they were. Neither of us used the word homeless, though the thought sat heavy with the ramen packets. Neither of us used any word that might make the shape of what happened too neat. On the way out, we passed a hand-lettered sign wired to the chain-link fence. Demolition begins June 12th, it said. Keep out. Someone had written below that in black marker. And no trespassing. Someone lives here. I want to tear it down or add to it or both. Instead, I got in the car. We didn't speak until my cousin turned onto the main road and the mill slipped behind the trees. I'm sorry, he said, eyes on the asphalt. Me too, I said, for opening it. He nodded, and the wipers squeaked across a dry windshield once before he found the switch to turn them off. We left the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and diesel. After a mile, he said, quietly, we should tell someone. Who? He didn't answer. We drove the rest of the way in the kind of silence that isn't empty. It's too full to allow anything else. At his house, we washed our hands in the kitchen sink until the water ran cold. Later, in bed with the fan on and the town night moving through the screens, I realized what had been bothering me most. The person who locked us in had never tried the handle. They knew from the sound alone that the bolt had dropped. They knew exactly how the metal would settle. They knew exactly how much noise to make to let us know they were there, and exactly how little their words needed to be. They had done this before, enough times that a calendar scratched with a nail was only a piece of a system. 14 excess. 2 weeks. I didn't sleep. The next morning, my cousin made coffee strong enough to hurt. We didn't say anything until the second cup, when he slid his phone across the table. It showed a news item from the local paper, 2 months old. A missing person flyer for a man last seen near the river. He wore a denim jacket in the photo. Could be anybody's jacket. My cousin said too quickly. Could be, I said. We didn't go back. They tore the mill down the following month. Trucks and men in hard hats and a water cannon to keep the dust down. We watched from the highway once, just long enough to see a wall shiver and fold. The river looked brighter that day. The town smelled different after. Sometimes I dream of that door opening inward instead of out. In the dream I push and it gives like a curtain and the room is empty and the scratch marks on the wall spell out something human like a name. In the waking world, I know 2 things. First, we were not special. We were a problem that someone solved the way you solve a draft under a door. Second, whoever wrote, Don't Talk had learned the hard way that sound carries in buildings like that. It moves up and sideways and never quite leaves. When the wind is right, carried from the direction of the river, I swear I can still smell the old mill. It's faint and full of endings. I tell myself it's only memory. Then I lock my own doors from the inside and sleep with the fan on to make a safe kind of noise. I was on a cross-country trip, heading to Maine for work and planning to visit friends and family along the East Coast. On my fourth day of driving, I was navigating through Pennsylvania. The drive mostly passed through empty, one-lane highways with occasional small towns. As evening fell, rain began to pour and my fuel was running low. I hadn't seen a gas station for a while until I spotted a small one nestled among trees, barely visible through the fog. Relieved, I pulled in and tried to refuel, but both pumps were out of order. Frustrated, I noticed a dim light in the small building nearby. Hoping for help, I approached the door, which was fogged over. I couldn't see inside clearly, but the dim light suggested someone might be there. The door screeched open, revealing an empty and wrecked store. Shelves were knocked over, and the place looked abandoned for years. A strange lamp illuminated the back, casting an eerie glow. Feeling uneasy, I hurried back outside. As I turned towards my car, I saw a person drenched and staring in my car windows. Startled, I yelled at them. They glanced at me and then looked past me towards the store. A man emerged from the store with long black hair and a chilling look. Without hesitation, he sprinted towards me. I scrambled into my car, but he tried to open the door. I managed to drive off, hearing a scrape as he ran a knife along my car. I sped away, running on fumes until my car finally sputtered to a stop. Thankfully, I had cell service and called for help. Later that night, the police told me the gas station had been closed for over a decade. What would have happened if I hadn't escaped remains a chilling thought. The building looked dead from the street. 300,000 square feet of windows boarded with plywood and spray paint. But dead things still make noise. On windy nights, the plywood rattled like teeth. The downspouts clicked and knocked. The chain-link fence sang. I was the night guy. A temp, 12-hour shifts, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., in a place slated for demolition as soon as the city finished arguing about permits. My supervisor was a broad-shouldered man with a faded security jacket and a paper cup that always smelled like cough syrup. First night, he walked me through the basics. Keep the gates locked, keep the contractors off the roof. No one past the third floor. Unsafe, he said, tapping the laminated floor plan with a bitten fingernail. Rotten stair treads. Elevators ghosted. Don't be a hero. He handed me an old two-way radio with the antenna taped on and a key ring heavy enough to be a weapon. Then he tapped the plan again. Memorize this. If the fire department shows up, you're their map. I took the floor plan home in my head. It was dated mid-2000s, before the company left, before the copper thieves, before the storms. Still, it gave me something like order. Lobby, atrium, north and south wings, bathrooms, mechanical rooms, stairwells A through D. Floors 1 to 3 open offices and cubicles. Floors 4 to 7 cubicles and labs. Floor 8 executive suites, and the boardroom with a long, oval table. The plan ended there, a neat stack of rectangles with a legend that said, "Roof, mechanical only." Don't go past 3, he'd said. No point, but dead buildings make you curious. They were their own history, like a smell. And after a week of walking the same loops, listening to the same wind, a person starts to look for edges. Most nights were easy. I did my rounds, log times, clicked flashlights in the corners. I learned which doors stuck and which doors breathed when you open them. I learned that motion sensors flash even when they're not armed. They're just letting you know they see you. On the second week, I heard kids try the fence around midnight. I walked over, showed the uniform, and they scattered. On the fourth week, a copper crew came with a sawzall right at dusk, betting I'd be at dinner. I caught the flicker of their battery pack through a gap in the boards and hit the radio. By the time my supervisor cruised the lot, they'd already gone, leaving a curl of orange wire like a peeled fruit skin. He clapped my shoulder and told me I was doing fine. "Keep it boring," he said. "Boring gets you paid." It stayed boring until I saw the hallway. It was close to 2 a.m., that slow hour when your body runs out of coffee and wants to shut down. I was in stairwell B, walking up to the third floor to check the alarm panel that wasn't connected to anything anymore, but still lit up like a Christmas tree. The stairwell smelled like wet concrete and spray paint. My boots echoed. On the third floor, the doorway opened onto a sea of low-walled cubes. Beyond that, a strip of private offices with glass fronts and blinds half bent, and beyond those, a long corridor that ran east to west. I'd walked that corridor a dozen times. It ended at double doors chained from the inside. But that night, when I turned into it, my flashlight showed something wrong with the geometry. On the right-hand wall, where the plan said there should be 2 copy rooms and a break room, there was a seam. Not a door, a seam. Bare gypsum with a thin line of joint compound, and next to it, a narrow opening. A hallway. I stopped, took out the laminated plan, ran my finger along the corridor. Copy rooms, break room, electrical closet. No narrow opening. No hallway. I told myself I'd never noticed before because the light was bad last time. I told myself the contractor maybe put up temporary walls years ago. The mind looks for any excuse that keeps the world normal. The opening was just wide enough for my shoulders. Past it, the air cooled down the way air does near concrete. Someone had screwed a single bulb fixture to the ceiling and wired it into the existing conduit with a scrap of lamp cord. The bulb was dead, so my flashlight did all the work. The beam fell on a run of doors. No numbers, just blank, unpainted slabs, spaced 8 feet apart like storage units. The floor was bare concrete. The smell was faint and human, breath and detergent. I counted the doors. 6 on the right, 6 on the left. At the far end, the hallway turned 90 degrees and ran parallel to the corridor I knew, doubling the building's guts without permission. I put my hand on the nearest door. It didn't have a knob, just a simple slide bolt with screw heads that looked new. I slid it back. It made a light, clean sound. The room was 10 by 8. No window. The walls were raw gypsum with footprints where the drywallers had pushed off. On the floor sat a cheap foam mattress, a folded gray blanket, a plastic bin with a toothbrush and a bar of soap, and a coffee can filled with cigarette butts. Next to the mattress, a phone charger with the cord coiled neat, but no outlet nearby. On the back wall, at knee height, someone had drawn a line of small dashes with a pencil. Not a calendar. Spacing too tight. Tallies of seconds, maybe, or a fidget turned permanent. I stood in the doorway too long. The radio on my belt hissed a little, as if offended by the dead zone. I shut the bolt. I checked the room across from it. Same mostly. Mattress, blanket, bin. But this one had a backpack leaning against the wall, a cheap nylon thing with a broken zipper pull replaced by a paperclip. I didn't touch it. I looked and left it alone. I went 2 more doors down. In that room, the mattress was unrolled and the blanket lay open with a dent in the middle big enough for a person. A paperback book sat face down on the floor as if someone had just set it there to take a break and would be right back. The book was about learning English verbs. I swallowed and kept counting rooms. Halfway down, I found a candle. It was a small white pillar, the kind you get in packs of 4 at the dollar store, set in a metal cap from a jar so the wax wouldn't spill. There was a lighter next to it, and the candle was burning. I turned the flashlight down to save my night vision and just looked at the flame. It wasn't fresh. The top had a little crater and the wax had dripped once down the side, but it was still going. Maybe an hour left of life, maybe less. I don't know why that made my scalp prickle worse than anything else. Maybe because it meant someone had been here not long before me and might still be here, listening to the building breathe while a stranger read their book with a flashlight and a radio. I backed away, carefully like moving around a sleeping dog. I slid the bolt on that room as quietly as I could. For a second, I thought about snuffing the candle. Then I didn't. I didn't want to change anything. I didn't want to touch someone's fire. At the corner, the hallway turned and kept going, tighter now. On the left, a door hung slightly open. My light found a narrow table and a folded map. Not a building map. A neighborhood map with bus lines drawn on in blue pen. Next to it, a stack of ID badges clipped to a lanyard. Old employee badges, driver's licenses, a library card, all with the photos scratched like someone was trying to erase faces. On the wall above the table, a handwritten chart in marker listed days of the week and times in 24-hour format. The column headings were initials, R, H, M, L. The rows had numbers I recognized immediately. My rounds. 1 F Atrium 1830. North Lot 1900 hours. Perimeter West 1945. Lobby 2015. Stair B 2200 hours. 3 F East 2 o'clock. Under 3F East 2 o'clock someone had drawn a simple I, 2 lines, and a dot. I stood there with my mouth a little open like a fish. The radio on my belt hissed again, then popped as the dispatch tower far away burped out a test tone. I had one thought. Someone knew my route better than I did. The open door across from the table didn't go to a room. It went to a narrow, hidden stair that sliced down through the building like a throat. The steps were metal with open risers. I pointed my light down and saw the shadow of a chain across the bottom landing. A padlock had been snapped shut on one link. The chain didn't look old. The locked door at the top had a peephole drill that I hiked. Not a factory peephole, a rough hole bored with a spade bit. I leaned just close enough to see that the edge was shiny where skin and hair had polished it. Someone had stood here and watched the corridor beyond. Watch me. I moved back into the makeshift hall with its blank doors and the little warm light, and I felt the building shift in my head. You work night security. You tell yourself a story. You are the point between order and chaos, the one person awake while the rest of the world sleeps. You tell yourself you know the place. But this wasn't my story. This was theirs, and I was a moving part in it, predictable and charted. The radio crackled with my supervisor's voice. Status. I pressed transmit. All clear. Copy, he said. Stay warm. I didn't mention the hallway. At that moment, I don't know if I stayed quiet out of fear or out of some sudden, strange politeness, like walking in on a conversation not meant for me and backing out without interrupting. I made a decision that felt brave and then did not. I slid each bolt back to how I'd found it. I didn't open any more doors. I didn't blow out the candle. I stepped out of the narrow opening and back into the third-floor corridor that belonged to the plan. I took one long breath. The air in the real hallway smelled like old printer toner and dry carpet. I walked away. For the next hour, I stayed on the first floor with the lobby lights and the exit signs in the glass front that showed me the street. I sat at the security desk and read my training manual twice. At 3:30, I heard movement in stairwell D. Footfalls that moved quick and then stopped. Not like a person sneaking, but like a person who knew every squeak and which ones to skip. I stood and put my hand on my radio and did nothing. At 4 a.m., my supervisor texted, swinging by. He liked to do that near the end of shift, ostensibly to check on me, but really to chat and borrow the bathroom. When he came in the lobby door, he took off his cap and blew into his hands as if he'd been walking in real weather, not from his warm truck. Quiet? He asked. Pretty much, I said. We drank coffee from a stained mug that said property of HR. He told me a story about a different building where a raccoon had figured out the motion lights. He watched my face while he talked, like a parent gauging whether a kid had slept. After a minute, I said, "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "On the third floor," I said lightly. "North corridor. Is there some construction? Temporary walls?" He didn't blink. He looked into his cup. "Past third is off limits," he said. "This is on third." He smoothed a thumb over a chip in the mug's handle. "Some rooms in that wing were decommissioned. Fire code stuff. Don't worry about it." "Right," I said. He put the mug down and leaned back in a chair, the vinyl squeaking. "You're doing fine," he said again. "Keep it boring." When he left, he set his empty cup on the desk with the handle pointing toward me like a compass. I made it to 6 a.m. My relief came yawning and red-eyed. I gave him the clipboard and the keys and told him the usual, perimeter secure, kids at the fence around midnight, wind loud from the west. I didn't mention the hallway. Daylight made the building look less like a story and more like a problem for a contractor. The boards were just boards. The fence was just fence. I drove home on empty streets, took a long shower, and sat at my kitchen table with the laminated plan. I traced the third floor corridor with a pencil. I added the narrow opening where my memory said it belonged and sketched a second hall parallel to it with 12 little boxes along it, left and right. It looked like a spine with ribs. It looked like something that shouldn't fit, but did. I told myself I'd call the city, or the company that owned the place, or shelter, or the fire marshal. Then I started a second night shift and a third, and it became the kind of thing you intend to do after you sleep and your brain feels right. The intention felt good enough for a while to stand in for the act. 2 nights later, the candle was out and replaced by a fresh one with a new crater melting its own little lake. The chart on the wall had a new line, 3F East 150 to 210. My radio had squeaked at 150 when the dispatch tower checked in. Someone listened as closely as I did. I didn't go farther in. I didn't go past the corner. I stood there and looked at the flame. After a minute, I took a step forward and set the lanyard of ID badges face down so the scratch photos didn't stare. Then I walked out and did my round. I quit at the end of the month. I told the temp agency I needed something with daylight. It was true. It was also not the reason. The reason was I didn't want to be a piece in a chart I hadn't drawn. On my last night, I printed a copy of the plan on the office laser printer that still worked when you coaxed it. In the space under the legend, I wrote in all caps, "There is an unmarked hallway on 3F East. People may be living there. Please be careful." Then I folded it and slid it into the security desk drawer under the clipboards. A week later, driving past on an errand, I saw the orange arm of an excavator biting at the south wall. The building tore open like a cardboard box. Rebar bent and sang. Dust rose and turned the morning into a sepia photograph. I pulled over and watched for a long time, waiting to see the part of the third floor I knew, the neat corridor with glass fronts, the narrow seam of the opening. But demolition isn't surgical. It takes bites and moves on. The machine chewed, swallowed, chewed again. A slab fell, and for half a second, I saw a cutaway of rooms that were not on any plan, blank walls, bare floors, the ghost of a candle stain on concrete. And then the bucket swung back and erased it. That night, at home, I put the laminated plan in a drawer with my tax receipts. I kept the radio for a while, even though it wasn't mine. The agency forgot to ask for it back. Sometimes it crackled when a storm rolled through. I changed the batteries and set on a shelf. It was a small, private noise in a quiet place. I don't have a story with a clean end. I didn't save anyone. If someone was being hurt in that building, I don't know it. If people were only sleeping there because there was nowhere else to be, I don't know that either. I know only that there was a hallway that didn't belong to the plan, and in that hallway there were rooms you could bolt from the outside, and a candle that burned down 1 hour at a time. And I know that while I walked loops in my uniform, someone watched my routine through a rough hole worn smooth by a brow. Sometimes, in the middle of the day, when sunlight finds the dust in my apartment just right, I can see the mark my pencil made when I drew the unmarked hallway on the copy of the plan. It's a thin line, not quite straight. I think about the people who built spaces that aren't on paper. I think about the spaces we all build, the ones between what's official and what's true. And I remember that the boring nights are only boring because someone is working to keep them that way, steady as a hand near a small flame, tracing time in a column of wax. When my friend Eli called me about the old theater, I thought he was joking. It's open for one night, he said. The city's letting a handful of volunteers in to grab anything worth salvaging before demolition. You want to come? The building had been closed for 30 years. It stood like a tomb on Main Street. Marquee letters long gone, plaster facade crumbling. As kids, we dared each other to peek through the boarded lobby doors. I'd always imagined the inside smelled like mothballs and secrets. We met at sunset. The front doors were propped open for the first time in decades, revealing a lobby layered in dust and faded carpet. A couple of other volunteers were hauling out chairs and brass rails. The light from outside barely reached the main auditorium, which was swallowed in gloom. The stage dominated the far end, framed by a sagging velvet curtain. The boards were warped, the kind of thing you could twist an ankle on. A narrow ladder led up to the fly system above, but my eyes were drawn to something else, a trapdoor, just off-center, the edges outlined in grime. You ever been under there? I asked Eli. He shook his head. They say it's a storage pit. Props, costumes, that kind of thing. We finished helping move a row of seats. Then curiosity got the better of us. The trapdoor's metal ring was cold and gritty in my hand. It took both of us to lift it. The hinges groaned like they were waking up after a long sleep. A blast of stale air rose from the opening. My flashlight beam showed a short flight of wooden steps leading down into shadow. The space below was barely tall enough to stand in. You going first? Eli said, half smiling. I went. The boards flexed under my boots as I descended. The smell was stronger down here, dust, damp cloth, something metallic. My light swept across piles of scenery flats and a cluster of wooden crates stenciled with faded words. Wardrobe, props, lighting. In the far corner, a wall of canvas backdrops leaned at an angle. One of them shifted slightly as I passed, like it was catching a draft. But there was no draft down here. Anything good? Eli called from above. Just old junk, I said. I was about to suggest we head back up when I noticed something. Behind the leaning backdrops, the floor didn't meet the wall. There was a dark gap, maybe 2 feet wide. My light caught on something in that space, something pale. It looked like a face. For a second, I told myself it was a mask, maybe part of a costume. But it didn't hang like a mask. It was level, still, and watching me. I froze, every instinct screaming to back away. Then the pale shape moved, slowly, tilting like someone adjusting their head to see better. Eli, I said quietly, get down here. He clattered down the steps, muttering about my tone. When my beam hit the gap again, the face was gone. Only the darkness remained. What? He asked. I pointed. Something was in there. We both crouched, peering into the gap. The smell of metal was stronger here, mixed with something sour. My light found scuffed floorboards leading deeper under the stage, out of sight. Probably a raccoon, Eli whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. We argued for half a minute before deciding to check it out. We pushed the backdrops aside, the wood frames creaking. The gap opened into a narrow crawl space. I went first, hunched over, my light bouncing ahead. The space widened slightly, just enough for a person to crouch. And there, against the far wall, was a sleeping bag. Filthy, flattened from long use. Beside it, a metal tin, an empty water bottle, and a plastic shopping bag tied shut. "Someone's been living here," I said. Eli was about to respond when we heard it, the faint sound of breathing. Not ours. Deeper, slower. The beam of my flashlight quivered in my hand. We turned toward the sound, and that's when he appeared. A man, emerging from the shadows on the other side of the crawl space. He was thin, shoulders hunched, his hair a matted tangle. His eyes caught the light and seemed to hold it. He didn't say anything. He just crouched there, looking at us, one hand on the floor, like he was ready to move in any direction. I couldn't tell how old he was. 30? 50? His face was sunken but expressionless, like he'd worn it that way for years. "We didn't know anyone was here," I said, my voice shaking. "We're leaving." The man tilted his head, the motion eerily slow. His lips parted just enough for a whisper to come out. "It's not your turn." My skin went cold. "What?" He blinked once, then began moving. Not toward us, but sideways, into a darker gap between two support beams. The space there looked far too small for a person, yet he slid into it with unsettling ease until all that remained visible was one pale hand. Then that too vanished. Eli grabbed my arm. "Let's go." We scrambled out of the crawl space, shoving the backdrops back into place without caring about the noise. Up the stairs, through the trapdoor, slamming it shut. The air of the auditorium felt sharp and clean compared to the pit. One of the other volunteers called over, asking if we'd found anything interesting. Neither of us answered. We left without taking a single piece of salvage. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what the man had said. "It's not your turn." I kept hearing the way he'd whispered it, like it was part of some ongoing arrangement I didn't understand. A week later, the theater was demolished. I drove by out of morbid curiosity, expecting to see the lot cleared, but they'd only knocked down part of the building. The stage was still standing, the trapdoor visible from the street. There was a man sitting on the edge of the stage, legs dangling. From the distance, I couldn't make out his face, but his head turned toward my car as I passed, slow and deliberate, like he knew I was watching. I didn't go back. I've explored plenty of abandoned buildings, but schools always have a strange weight to them. Even after years of emptiness, they still feel like they're waiting for the next bell to ring. The high school on Ashford Street had been closed for over a decade, sealed after asbestos was found in the walls. Locals said the demolition kept getting delayed because the city didn't have the funds. In the meantime, it just sat there, a hulking red brick shell with boarded windows and a chain-link fence sagging in places. One Sunday afternoon, my friend Leah and I slipped in through a gap in the fence. The back gym door had been pried open by someone long before us, the metal bent like foil. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Every step echoed, bouncing down empty hallways. Lockers stood open, doors hanging by one hinge. We started on the first floor, poking through classrooms that all looked the same. Desks stacked in the corners, bulletin boards with curling edges, the smell of dust and mildew heavy in the air. Most of the windows were covered from the inside with plywood, so our flashlights were the only light. It was when we got to the second floor that things changed. We were walking down a hallway lined with science labs when we saw it. Halfway down, one of the classroom doors stood open and light spilled into the hall. Not sunlight, a bright, buzzing, artificial light. Leah stopped. That's not possible. The school had no power. Everyone in town knew that. The breaker panels had been stripped years ago, copper wiring gone. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight bouncing along the wall until it met the spill of steady white light from the open door. The sound of it hit me next, the faint hum of fluorescent tubes. We exchanged a look, then eased toward the doorway. Inside, the room was spotless. The floor gleamed as if it had been mopped yesterday. Desks stood in neat rows, each with a chair pushed in perfectly. On the teacher's desk sat a stack of textbooks without a speck of dust. Leah whispered, "This isn't right." The overhead light fixture was on, tubes glowing steadily. I stepped inside and looked up. No visible wiring. The casing was sealed, pristine. I glanced back at the doorway, where the hallway lay in dim shadow. The difference between in here and out there felt like stepping between two different buildings. Leah ran her finger along one of the desks. "No dust," she said. "Ow!" I didn't have an answer. My eyes were drawn to the far corner of the room, where a single chair sat apart from the others, angled toward the wall. I walked over. On the wall above, it was a framed photo, an old-class picture, the kind where everyone's posed in neat rows. The glass was cracked, but the faces were still visible. Something about the back row caught my attention. There were 12 kids standing there, but one face had been scratched out so thoroughly the paper had torn. Leah called my name. I turned. She was standing near the windows, her flashlight off, looking pale. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I hadn't heard anything, but as soon as she said it, the overhead light flickered once, twice, then went steady again. We both stood still, listening. From the far corner of the room came the slow sound of a chair scraping across the floor. I swung my light toward it. The chair that had been facing the wall was now turned halfway toward us. Leah swore under her breath. "We need to go." I stepped backward toward the door, my eyes locked on that chair. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder now, almost pressing against my ears. The air had gone warmer, too, like the room was holding its breath. We were almost to the hallway when the lights snapped off. The sudden darkness was so thick it felt physical. Leah's flashlight clicked on instantly, the beam darting around the room. The desks were still neat, the floor still clear, but the chair was now facing directly at us. We didn't wait to see more. We ran into the hallway, our footsteps pounding. The school seemed darker now, the silence heavier. We didn't speak until we were outside, gasping in the cold air. Only then did I realize something. When the lights went out, there hadn't been the faint click or hum you hear when a fixture shuts down. It had been silent, like the light had never been there at all. 2 weeks later, the local paper ran a story saying the school had been broken into and vandalized. The accompanying photo showed the hallway outside that same classroom. The door was closed, a heavy chain looped through the handle. The caption said that particular room had been sealed since the 1980s, after a student incident the school never elaborated on. The article didn't say what happened in there, but it did mention that the teacher's desk, when they looked inside, was covered in decades of dust, and there was no light fixture in the ceiling, just an empty space where one had been removed years ago. I work for a small property management company, the kind that handles old buildings most landlords won't touch. One of our contracts was for a 7-story apartment block built in the 1940s. It was supposed to be vacant while awaiting renovations, but part of my job was to walk through once a week to check for squatters or water damage. The first 6 floors were always the same: dusty hallways, stripped units with bare floors, old fridges humming faintly until we unplugged them. I usually started at the top and worked my way down. On my 3rd visit, I noticed something off. The top floor had 6 apartments. Units 701 through 706 were all supposed to be empty. But 700SIX's door wasn't sealed with the usual strip of tape we put across the frame. I hesitated, then tried the knob. It turned easily. The moment the door opened, the smell hit me. Warm air mixed with something faintly floral, like laundry detergent. Inside, the lights were on. Not the bare bulb from the other units, but warm yellow lamps. I stepped inside slowly. The place was fully furnished. Sofa, coffee table, books on the shelves. A pair of slippers sat neatly by the door. The kitchen counter held a cutting board with a loaf of bread wrapped in plastic, and a kettle rested on the stove. I called out, "Hello? Maintenance." No answer. The bedroom had a neatly made bed with a blue quilt. A shirt was draped over the chair at the desk. On the nightstand sat a photo frame turned face down. I picked it up without thinking. The picture inside was warped and faded, but it showed a couple standing in front of the very same building decades earlier. The bathroom light was on. Inside, a toothbrush and toothpaste lay beside the sink. The mirror had a faint streak, as if someone had wiped condensation from it recently. I stepped back into the living room, uneasy. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of keys turning in the lock. The door swung shut, and I heard the bolts slide home from the other side. My chest tightened. "Hello." I called again. No answer. I tried the knob. It wouldn't turn. Whoever had locked it had done so deliberately. My phone was in my pocket, but I had no signal this high up in the building. Footsteps moved away from the door, down the hallway outside. Calm, unhurried. I pounded on the door until my hand hurt, but the footsteps didn't come back. Eventually, I sat on the couch, telling myself it had to be another worker who didn't realize I was inside. 15 minutes later, the lock clicked again. The door creaked open an inch, just enough for a sliver of the dim hallway light to spill in. No one stood there. I pulled the door wide. The hallway was empty. I didn't linger. I closed the door, this time leaving it unlocked, and left the apartment. The rest of the inspection was a blur. When I got back to the office, I told my manager about 706. She frowned. "There is number 706. I thought she was joking. "Top floor, into the hall," I said. She shook her head and pulled up the original floor plan on her computer. Unit 706 had been combined with 705 20 years ago, when they knocked down the wall to make a larger space. That space was gutted years ago, and it's still empty. I went back a week later to check for myself. At the end of the hall, where 700 and SIXS door should have been, was just a blank wall. No frame, no hinges, just plaster painted the same dull beige as the rest of the corridor. I haven't been back since. I was halfway through a long road trip when I decided to pull off at a cheap roadside hotel for the night. It wasn't the kind of place you booked ahead, just a squat, L-shaped building with a faded sign and a flickering vacancy light. The clerk was an older man with a cigarette stuck to his lower lip. While checking me in, he leaned forward slightly and said, "Don't go wandering behind the west wing. That part's been closed for years." I figured he meant it as a safety thing, maybe broken pavement or wild animals. But that warning lodged in my mind. My room was on the east side, but curiosity got the better of me. After I dropped my bag, I took a walk to stretch my legs and drifted toward the west wing. The main hallway past the last occupied rooms was blocked by a sagging chain, but there was also a side door propped open with a cracked rubber wedge. I slipped through. Immediately the air changed, warmer, heavier, tinged with mildew. The carpet here was sun-faded and threadbare. Most of the doors had room numbers painted over in black. At the far end of the corridor, a double set of swinging doors led to what I thought might be a storage area. I pushed through and found myself in a long, dim hallway. On each side were doors with no numbers, just heavy padlocks. They weren't arranged like guest rooms. They were smaller, more like storage units. I passed the first few without thinking much of it, until I noticed what was inside one of them. The padlock was gone, and the door was ajar, just enough for me to peek in. It wasn't stacked with hotel supplies. It was piled with suitcases, dozens of them, all different sizes and colors, some scuffed and dented, some pristine. Many still had luggage tags attached. I moved to the next open unit. This one was filled with clothing, men's jackets, women's dresses, children's shoes, organized in heaps. In one corner, I saw a row of wallets lined neatly along a shelf, each with a slip of masking tape marked with a date. The hairs on my arms rose. I started backing away, but then I heard it, a slow, dragging sound from farther down the hall. It was steady, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall. The sound grew louder, closer. My breath felt too loud in my chest. In the gloom, a shadow stretched into view on the far wall. Long, thin, jerking slightly with the motion of the dragging. I didn't see the person making it, only that distorted outline. I inched toward the swinging doors, careful not to let them creak. The dragging sound paused, then resumed, but now it was angled toward where I stood. I pushed through the doors as quietly as I could and hurried down the main corridor. I didn't run until I was past the chain and back into the lit, carpeted section of the hotel. In my room, I locked the door and sat on the bed, tried to convince myself it was nothing sinister, just abandoned storage, maybe a hoarder's mess from when the wing closed. But the image of those neatly lined wallets wouldn't leave me. The next morning, when I checked out, the clerk didn't ask about my stay. He just gave me a long, tired look, as if he already knew I hadn't slept well. I thought about asking him outright about the storage wing, but I didn't. Something in his expression told me the less I knew, the better. I left without breakfast and didn't look back at the West Wing. But even on the highway, miles away, I could still hear that slow, deliberate dragging following me in my head.